Walt Kilbride was refilling his tractor's fuel tank in the same spot beside his barn where it had sat for 31 years when a certified letter arrived from Fairview Meadows HOA, citing him $9,800 for storage of unsightly commercial equipment visible from a shared corridor. A fine for parking a tractor on his own working farm, land that had never belonged to any homeowners association a single day in its history. Walt read the letter twice, folded it into his shirt pocket, and walked down to the gravel access road his grandfather had built across Kilbride land 70 years earlier, the only road connecting Fairview Meadows to the county fairgrounds, 3 miles closer than any other route. He posted a single handwritten notice on the road's gate that afternoon: closed for maintenance, effective immediately. Stay with Walt as one absurd fine, 3 weeks before the biggest county fair weekend in a decade, unravels into a scheme reaching directly into HOA President Geraldine Pruitt's private business dealings. Walt Kilbride was 61 years old, a second-generation farmer running 280 acres of corn and soybeans that bordered Fairview Meadows along its eastern fence line. His tractor, a well-maintained but visibly aged piece of equipment, had sat in the exact same spot beside his equipment barn for as long as anyone in the county could remember. Visible, yes, from the gravel access road, but entirely on his own property, 100 feet back from any line the HOA could plausibly claim jurisdiction over. Walt's grandfather had built the gravel access road decades before Fairview Meadows existed, originally to move cattle and equipment between his fields and the county fairgrounds, where the Kilbride family had shown livestock at the county fair for 4 generations running. When the subdivision was developed 20 years earlier, the county negotiated a recorded right-of-way easement allowing residents to use the road, with a standard maintenance clause permitting the Kilbride family to close it temporarily for repairs, harvest operations, or livestock movement, provided reasonable notice was given. Before we get any further into what Geraldine Pruitt thought she was dealing with, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching this from, because stories like Walt's have a way of sounding painfully familiar no matter what state or country you're in. Geraldine Pruitt, 52, had been Fairview Meadows HOA president for just under 2 years, having taken over after a career managing commercial event venues in the city before retiring, or so she told residents, to a quieter life. What most residents didn't know was that Geraldine had quietly launched a side business called Meadow Events LLC, renting out the HOA's clubhouse and grounds for private weddings and corporate functions, an arrangement the board had approved without fully understanding that Geraldine personally profited from every booking. Unable to find any legitimate basis to fine Walt directly, since his farm sat entirely outside HOA jurisdiction, Geraldine pushed through a narrowly worded shared corridor equipment standards bylaw at a sparsely attended board meeting, applying to any equipment visible from association-adjacent infrastructure. Language broad enough to snag Walt's tractor, parked exactly where it had always been parked, visible from the gravel road that happened to run along his property line. Walt called the HOA office expecting a quick, common-sense correction. Instead, he reached Geraldine directly, who informed him, in the same smooth, practiced tone she used with wedding clients, that the corridor standards applied regardless of technical property ownership, and that the fine would stand unless the tractor was relocated within 10 days. That tractor's been parked in that spot since before you moved to this county, Walt told her. Nobody's ever had a problem with it until now. Geraldine's answer was clipped. Standards evolve, Mr. Kilbride. I'd encourage you to comply before penalties accrue. Walt didn't argue further. He simply exercised the maintenance clause written into his family's own recorded easement, posting formal notice that the access road would close for scheduled grading and culvert repair. Legitimate work his road genuinely needed, work he'd been putting off for 2 seasons and had every right to finally schedule now. What Walt hadn't fully calculated, though he wasn't sorry about it once he realized it, was that the closure fell exactly 3 weeks before the county fair, the single biggest weekend of the year for Fairview Meadows residents, many of whom ran booths, volunteered at livestock judging, or simply attended every night of the 9-day event, all made dramatically easier by the 3-mile shortcut Walt's Road provided over the alternate county highway route. Within a day of the closure notice going up, the Fairview Meadows community group chat lit up with confusion turning quickly to alarm. A resident named Carla Whitmore, who ran a kettle corn stand at the fair every year and depended on multiple short supply runs each day, calculated the detour would cost her nearly 2 extra hours daily during the fair's busiest week, hours she genuinely couldn't spare from a business that only existed 9 days a year. Carla wasn't alone. A retired schoolteacher named Beatrice Solano, who volunteered every year running the 4-H check-in table, posted that the detour would add nearly an hour to her early morning drive. An hour she wasn't sure her arthritis-worn hips could handle comfortably at 6 in the morning for 9 straight days. A teenager named Marcus Whitfield, who'd been raising a prize hog for the past year specifically to show at this fair, worried out loud in the chat that the extra travel time and stress on the trailer ride might affect his animal's condition on judging day. A small detail that, to him, felt like the whole year's work suddenly at risk over a fight about a tractor. Carla drove straight to the HOA office that same afternoon, catching Geraldine just as she was leaving for what she'd later learn was a venue walkthrough with a wedding client. "Do you have any idea what this detour does to a business that only runs 9 days a year?" she asked her directly. Geraldine's response was measured, almost rehearsed. "I understand residents are frustrated, but the board doesn't control what a non-member does with his own easement rights. I'd suggest directing your concerns to Mr. Kilbride." Carla left more frustrated than when she'd arrived, unable to shake the feeling that Geraldine seemed strangely unbothered by a crisis she'd, as far as she knew, had no hand in creating. Geraldine told the board the closure was clearly a retaliatory overreaction, with no real legal standing, and suggested residents simply use the access road anyway, since she doubted Walt would actually enforce anything. That advice held up for exactly 1 day, until a resident's truck got stuck attempting to cross a section of road genuinely torn up for the culvert work Walt had already, legitimately, begun. Carla Whitmore, furious about both the closure and Geraldine's advice that had nearly gotten someone's truck stuck in an active construction zone, stood up at the next informal neighborhood gathering and asked a question that would end up defining the rest of the story. Why does Geraldine care so much about a tractor that's been sitting there for 30 years? What changed? Walt, increasingly certain this had nothing to do with an actual aesthetic concern, retained a property attorney named Desmond Okafor, who requested the full history of the corridor standards vote and found it had passed with only 4 of the 9 board members present, none of whom recalled being told the rule was intended to apply to a farm entirely outside the association's jurisdiction. Desmond's paralegal pulled county business registration records and found Meadow Events LLC registered to Geraldine Pruitt personally, with a booking calendar, obtained through a public records request covering the HOA's shared facility usage logs, showing the venue booked nearly every weekend for the past 8 months, generating revenue that, under the HOA's own facility use bylaws, should have been split with the association's general fund but instead flowed entirely to Geraldine's private LLC. The booking calendar alone showed 31 separate events over 8 months, each charging clients between $3,000 and $8,000 depending on guest count, catering arrangements, and whether the client wanted the premium Fairgrounds adjacent package. A phrase that appeared, verbatim, on Meadow Events' own marketing website, right below a photo of Walt's gravel road stretching toward the Fairgrounds in the distance. Desmond's paralegal, a sharp young researcher named Yusuf Adeyemi, cross-referenced the HOA's bank statements against the booking calendar and found something even more damning. The HOA's own facility maintenance fund, meant to cover upkeep of the very clubhouse and grounds Geraldine was renting out, had been running a quiet deficit for 6 straight months, covered instead by a series of special assessments, charged to ordinary residents who had no idea they were effectively subsidizing the maintenance costs of a business Geraldine was personally profiting from every single weekend. Digging further, Desmond found something that reframed the entire fence fine. 3 months earlier, Geraldine had begun private conversations with a wedding planning firm about marketing Fairview Meadows as a premier venue destination, specifically citing improved, exclusive access to the county fairgrounds corridor as a selling point for larger events that would need overflow parking that would require securing guaranteed, unobstructed use of Walt's Road, something Walt's family had never agreed to and had no reason to grant a private, for-profit business. Desmond laid the timeline out for Walt on his office whiteboard. Geraldine's venue marketing conversations began in March. The Corridor Standards bylaw was quietly drafted in May. Walt's fine arrived in June. "This was never about your tractor," Desmond told him. "Your tractor just happened to be the easiest excuse to manufacture a conflict that made you look unreasonable right before she needed your road." Rather than back off as residents grew more suspicious, Geraldine escalated, sending Walt a second citation for willful obstruction of shared infrastructure during the closure window. A charge with no basis whatsoever in an easement that explicitly authorized exactly the maintenance work he was performing. With the county fair now just 5 days away and the access road still under legitimate repair, Fairview Meadows residents began organizing carpools for the highway detour, and several, including Carla, started quietly asking whether Geraldine might be personally responsible for making a beloved community tradition dramatically harder for everyone that year. Beatrice Solano, still nursing her worry about the extra hour on her commute to the 4-H check-in table, started a spreadsheet, half-joking at first, tracking every resident's estimated extra travel time for the week, a document that, once shared in the group chat, made the cumulative cost of the closure impossible to ignore. Nearly 400 combined extra hours of driving across the whole neighborhood over 9 days, all stemming from a fine over a tractor that had sat in the same spot for 3 decades. Marcus Whitfield's father, increasingly worried about the trailer ride's effect on his son's hog with judging day approaching, called the HOA office directly to ask whether an exception could be made for livestock transport specifically, given the animal welfare concern. Geraldine's office informed him, politely but firmly, that no exceptions were being made, since the road closure was outside the HOA's authority to resolve. A technically true statement that nonetheless struck Marcus's father as a strange thing to say from someone who, unbeknownst to him, had personally created the circumstances making that exception necessary in the first place. With the community's patience thinning fast, the board called an emergency meeting to address both the road closure and the growing rumors about Geraldine's private venue business. A meeting Walt attended alongside Desmond Okafor, who requested time during the public comment period. Desmond laid it out methodically for a packed room. The improperly passed corridor rule, the board members never told it would apply to non-member property. Geraldine's private venue marketing conversations requiring exclusive road access, and the facility revenue that should have benefited the entire community, but had instead flowed quietly into Geraldine's own LLC for 8 straight months. He projected the venue marketing materials onto the wall Fairview Meadows name in photos used to advertise weddings, with Walt's Fairgrounds road specifically highlighted as a selling point, and let the room sit with it in total silence. Geraldine attempted to characterize the venue business as a service I provide the community at no extra board burden, an explanation that fell apart the moment Desmond produced the HOA's own facility use bylaws, requiring any board member's private business use of shared HOA space to be disclosed and revenue shared. A requirement Geraldine had simply never followed for 8 months, while personally collecting every dollar. Beatrice Solano, sitting near the front with her travel time spreadsheet still open on her phone, asked the question that seemed to land hardest in the room. So the special assessment we all paid in March, the one you told us was for general maintenance, that was actually covering the cost of your wedding business? Geraldine had no clean answer for that. She started 3 different sentences and finished none of them, while Yusuf quietly pulled up the maintenance fund deficit chart on the projector, letting the numbers speak in a silence that stretched long enough to feel physically uncomfortable for everyone in the room, Geraldine most of all. If watching a scheme like this finally unravel in front of an entire packed room is exactly the kind of payoff you come back for, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because the verdict that's about to land is one of the more satisfying ones in this whole series. The board voted that same night to rescind the corridor standards rule entirely, void both citations against Walt, and remove Geraldine from the presidency pending a full financial audit of Meadow Events LLC's 8 months of undisclosed bookings. Walt, on Desmond's advice, pursued a claim for wrongful citation and harassment, ultimately settling for full reimbursement of his legal costs. A formal written acknowledgement that his farm remained entirely outside HOA jurisdiction, and a $310,000 combined judgment covering damages and the community's share of Geraldine's undisclosed venue revenue, which the audit determined should have been split with the HOA's general fund from the very first booking. Walt finished his road repairs 2 days ahead of schedule and reopened the gate personally, standing at the gravel entrance waving residents through as they drove past toward the fairgrounds. Carla among the first through, honking twice in appreciation, her kettle corn stand fully stocked for opening night after all. Fairview Meadows' new interim board formally reaffirmed the original road easement exactly as written, publicly thanked Walt for the legitimate repair work that had, ironically, left the road in better condition than it had been in years, and adopted new financial transparency rules requiring any board member's private business dealings involving shared HOA resources to be disclosed and approved in writing before any booking could proceed. On opening night of the county fair, Walt stood at his fence line watching a steady stream of headlights cross the road his grandfather built, the fairgrounds glowing with string lights in the distance the way they had every year of his life. A young reporter doing a follow-up piece asked him, half joking, whether he'd ever considered just leaving the road closed permanently after everything that happened. Walt thought about it for a moment before answering that he never once wanted to punish an entire community for one person's greed. He'd only ever wanted people to understand that a road built out of generosity could just as easily be taken away, and that the people who forget that distinction are usually the ones who end up losing the most. If you've ever had someone try to weaponize against you, leave a comment below. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it ended. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.